There's a strange kind of silence that enters a man when he finds a woman who genuinely loves him. Not the loud, performative kind of love, not infatuation, not control wrapped in compliments, but the terrifying, disarming kind of love that sees through him, that invites no performance, no mask, no armor, just presence, just him. And that is where the problem begins, because for most men, being truly seen is far more dangerous than being rejected. This isn't about ego. This isn't even about lust or freedom or commitment. It's deeper, older. It's about fear. A fear so buried that most men don't even know it's running the show. But it is. And when a good woman steps into a man's life and offers him something real, something sacred, he doesn't always rise to meet her. Sometimes he flinches. Sometimes he runs. Sometimes he burns it all down before it has a chance to bloom. And the worst part, he often doesn't even know why. John Gray understood this. Behind the pop psychology veneer of men are from Mars, he was pointing at something ancient. That love in its purest form demands more than most men are ready to give. Not because they are incapable, but because they have never been taught how to stay, how to open, how to receive. Most men are trained for conquest, not communion. We know how to chase, we know how to impress, but the moment we are no longer required to perform, when a woman simply sits with us and believes in us, that's when we begin to tremble. Because now we have no excuse, no chase to distract us, no drama to hide behind, no external mission to serve as proof of our worth. Now we are left with the one thing most of us have never been taught to face, our own hearts. And here is the paradox. The better the woman, the more healing her presence, the more likely an unprepared man is to sabotage it. Not because he doesn't want her, but because her presence exposes the very wounds he spent a lifetime covering up. Her calm reveals his chaos. Her clarity reveals his confusion. Her warmth highlights the places in him that have gone cold. And instead of moving toward her, instead of seeing her as a mirror and a medicine, he backs away, slowly at first, then completely. He tells himself she's too much, or too good, or not exciting enough. But the truth is simpler, darker, and far more honest. He is not ready to be loved. Because to be loved means to be known. And to be known means you can no longer hide. It means your story must come out. The parts you hate, the parts you've denied, the father you're still angry at, the shame you've swallowed, the little boy inside you who still doubts he's enough. And when a man hasn't made peace with those ghosts, love feels less like salvation and more like exposure. So he creates chaos, he picks fights, he withdraws, he cheats, not always in body but in spirit. He flirts with disconnection, he numbs with distraction, he stops showing up, not physically, but emotionally. He gives just enough to keep her guessing, but never enough to be truly seen. And all the while he tells himself he's protecting her, that she deserves better, that he's doing her a favor. But that's a lie. He's not protecting her, he's protecting his illusion. The illusion that he's not scared, that he's in control, that he doesn't need help. But every man eventually reaches the edge of that illusion. One day, he wakes up and realizes the chaos he thought he was avoiding by running from love was inside him all along. And no amount of independence, no string of shallow flings, no endless freedom can silence the ache he feels when he remembers the one woman who saw him and still stayed. The one he pushed away because he couldn't face the intensity of being known. And that is the tragedy. Not that men don't want love, but that they fear it. Because true love doesn't flatter your ego, it humbles it. It asks you to soften, to sit still, to open wounds you've kept closed for decades. And that's terrifying for a man who was taught to win, not to feel. But there is another path, one most men avoid because it requires more courage than any battlefield. The path of staying, of learning to receive, of letting a good woman in, not just into your bed, but into your history, your doubts, your dreams, your failures, the parts of you that no one applauds but still shape everything you are. Because here's the truth. A good woman is not a reward, she is a mirror. And what she reflects back is not always easy to face. But if you are willing, truly willing to stand still and look into that mirror without flinching, you may find something you never knew you were looking for. Not her approval, not her affection, but your own soul. Finally recognized, finally embraced, and finally ready to love in return.
So the man begins to wrestle, not with her, but with himself, with all the reasons he's built against intimacy, with the quiet panic that rises every time he feels something deeper than lust, with the armor he put on so long ago he forgot it was armor. Her love didn't create his fear. It revealed it. And that's the secret most never say out loud. The right woman doesn't bring peace at first. She brings disruption. Because what's real always disrupts what's false. She asks nothing more than for him to be himself. And yet that feels like everything because he spent years becoming someone else. Someone strong, composed, competent. He built a self around what the world rewarded. Productivity, ambition, invulnerability. But now she looks at him with eyes that see through all that. And she does the unthinkable. She loves the man beneath the mask. The man without the titles, without the shield. The man he's avoided becoming because it requires him to actually feel. So he panics, and it doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like logic, like practicality. He convinces himself that the timing isn't right, that he needs to get his life together first, that she'll be better off without him, that she deserves someone less complicated. These all sound noble, but they are the rationalizations of a man scared to be seen. Because deep down, he's not afraid she'll leave if she sees the real him. He's afraid she won't, and that's more terrifying. Why? Because then he'd have no more excuses, no more myths about being unlovable, no more illusions about needing to be perfect first. If she sees his brokenness and still chooses to stay, then he has to face the one thing he's avoided his entire life, that maybe love is real, and maybe he is worthy of it, not because of what he's achieved, but because of who he is. And that kind of acceptance feels foreign, unearned, almost unbearable. It doesn't help that many men grew up in environments where love was conditional, where they had to earn approval, prove their value, perform for praise. So now when love arrives unconditionally, it feels suspicious, dangerous, like a trap. What does he really want? What's the catch? What if I let her in and she changes her mind? The brain spirals, the heart closes. The sabotage begins not from hatred, but from a fear of being truly held. John Gray spoke often about how men retreat into caves, emotional withdrawal zones where they go to process or hide. But what he also hinted at subtly is that many never return. They stay in the cave because the light outside feels too bright, too vulnerable, too uncertain. And so they build a life inside it, with logic, with control, with just enough surface level connection to stay afloat. But something in them knows they are starving. That love knocked once, maybe twice, and they couldn't answer, not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't yet know how. The tragedy is not just in losing her, it's in what her presence could have taught him. About softness, about staying, about meeting love with presence, not panic. But in those critical moments that man often chooses familiarity over freedom. He chooses the ache he knows over the joy that terrifies him. Because joy, when you've spent no life with it, feels dangerous. Like it might disappear the moment you exhale. So many men end up haunted, not just by the women they lost, but by the men they never became. The ones who could have stood still, who could have learned to listen, who could have taken the leap into love and learned to swim instead of run. But instead they remain alone, even in relationships, always slightly guarded, always slightly skeptical, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And they call it maturity. They call it wisdom, but it's just a well-dressed fear. And yet, some men return. Some wake up after the sabotage and choose not to repeat the cycle. They said with their shame. They trace it to its roots. They stop blaming her for loving too much and start wondering why they believe they deserve so little. And in that quiet reckoning, a new man begins to form. Not a perfect one, not a fearless one, but an honest one. One who can finally say, I was afraid, but I don't want to be anymore. Because love is not just something you feel, it's something you practice. It's a skill, a discipline, and it starts the moment a man stops using fear as his compass and starts letting love remake him. Not in theory, not in poetry, but in the real, raw, daily decision to stay present, even when everything in him wants to bolt. The good woman, if she is still there, may wait, or she may not. That's her choice, her freedom. But whether she stays or leaves is not the point. The point is that her love was never meant to save him. It was meant to awaken him. And now he sees what it was trying to show him all along. That there is no substitute for love. No success or solitude or sex can replace it. And if a man is lucky, he'll fail at running from it just enough times to finally turn around and face it.
When he does, when a man finally turns around and faces love, he discovers that what he feared was never love itself, but the cost of surrender. He feared becoming small, becoming soft, becoming exposed. But what he never realized is that love doesn't shrink a man, it stretches him. It pulls him out of his dead routines, out of his mind-numbing safety, and into the raw, brutal work of becoming whole. And yes, it's terrifying, because it means he can no longer hide behind performance, no longer claim ignorance when he fails to show up, no longer point fingers outward when the emptiness is growing inward. This is where real masculinity begins, not in domination, but in devotion, not in control, but in capacity. The capacity to remain open when it's easier to shut down, to speak when silence would protect the ego, to apologize when pride would rather explain, to love not as a transaction but as a posture of presence. And that kind of man is rare, because that kind of man has burned through the illusions of strength and emerged, not unscarred, but unhidden. John Gray, when he wrote about men and women, wasn't just writing about relationships. He was writing about healing, about how both men and women carry myths into connection, and how men in particular are trained to equate love with weakness, emotion with chaos, vulnerability with loss of control. But this training doesn't make them strong. It makes them brittle. It makes them lonely. It makes them sabotage the very thing that could have softened them into something worth being. There is a point in every man's life, a pivot point, where he must choose between the fortress and the fire. The fortress is safe, predictable, walled off. It's where logic reigns and love is kept at a manageable distance. But the fire is alive. It doesn't obey. It doesn't flatter. It burns away everything false. And most men will run from that fire until life catches up, until the nights grow too quiet, until success rings hollow, until the body begins to break from carrying armor meant for wars that ended long ago. When that moment comes, and it will come, he'll remember. He'll remember the woman who saw him before he could see himself. The moments when her presence felt like a threat, not because it was dangerous, but because it was holy. He'll remember the times he pushed her away, not because she did anything wrong, but because she did everything right. She loved him, and he couldn't receive it. But now, maybe he can. Not with perfection, but with willingness, with humility, with the awareness that love is not something you earn, it's something you let in. And sometimes, letting it in is the bravest thing a man will ever do. Braver than any career conquest, any physical feat, any intellectual victory. Because love doesn't make a man less, it makes him real. And if he ever gets the chance again, if he meets another good woman who loves without condition, he might not flinch this time,
he might lean in. He might breathe through the panic. He might finally understand that fear is not the enemy of love, resistance is. That it's okay to tremble, okay to stumble, as long as he keeps choosing to stay open. Because that's all love really asks, that you keep choosing it, even when your history tells you not to. So to the men who've sabotaged love, who've turned their back on the very thing that could have healed them, there is no shame in having failed. The shame would be in refusing to try again. Because the truth is, the fear never fully goes away, but it becomes smaller when you stop feeding it. And the heart grows louder, wiser, more certain, not of the outcome, but of the value. That love is always worth the risk. John Gray's work pointed to this in quiet ways, that men retreat not because they don't care, but because they care more than they know how to handle. And learning to handle it, that's the initiation. That's the real transformation. That's where a man stops being a prisoner of his past and becomes the steward of his future, not just for himself, but for every relationship he touches, for every woman who dares to love him, for every boy watching how he handles her heart. Because love doesn't just change the man, it changes the world around him. It ripples outward, silently, powerfully, until one man's healing becomes a lineage of safety, of softness, of strength that isn't afraid to bend. And when that happens, when a man loves not from fear, but from freedom, that's when you know the sabotage is over and the real story has finally begun. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.